never removed the black veil that covered her face, and those who asked why were never heard from again. Before we step into this story, tell me where you're listening from. Are you alone in your room, driving through an empty road, or lying awake long after midnight? Comment your country below. And if you're drawn to stories like this, subscribe now, because some truths demand witnesses. The autumn rain fell heavy over the Pennsylvania countryside as Thomas Whitmore's carriage struggled through a rutted forest road, wheels sinking into mud that smelled of rot and pine sap. For 3 days, the journalist had followed rumors, whispered in taverns and half-printed in forgotten gazettes, rumors of a remote inn where travelers vanished without explanation. Pine Hollow Inn, a place locals spoke of only after a second drink, and never by name if they could help it. Thomas was 26, ambitious, and hungry for the kind of story that could lift his byline out of obscurity. His editor at the Philadelphia Chronicle had dismissed the rumors as rural superstition, but Thomas saw opportunity where others saw nonsense. Small-town mysteries sold papers, and if there was a hoax behind the whispers, he intended to expose it. The inn emerged from the fog like a skeletal hand clawing up from the earth. 3 stories of weathered timber loomed behind a wall of pine trees so dense they swallowed what little daylight remained. A single lamp burned above the entrance, its flame flickering as though something unseen breathed against it. The carriage stopped. Thomas stepped down, boots sinking into the soaked ground. The driver, an older man named Garrett, handed him his trunk without meeting his eyes. "You sure about this, Mr. Whitmore?" Garrett murmured. "There's a proper hotel 15 miles east." "I'm sure," Thomas replied, adjusting his coat. "Come back in 3 days." Garrett hesitated, then shook his head. "If you're still here." Moments later, the horses were urged forward, vanishing into the mist with unsettling speed, leaving Thomas alone before the heavy oak door. He knocked twice. The sound echoed longer than it should have, as if the building itself were hollow. The door opened silently. A woman stood in the threshold, draped entirely in black. Thick fabric concealed her face from forehead to chest, an opaque veil that revealed nothing. Only her hands were visible, pale, still, folded gently at her waist. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was soft, calm, and carried a strange clarity that made Thomas think of distant bells. "You must be Mr. Whitmore. We've been expecting you." A chill crept down his spine. "You knew I was coming?" "We know when someone seeks answers." She stepped aside. "Please, come in from the cold." The interior of Pine Hollow Inn was immaculate. Polished floors reflected the lamplight. Brass fixtures gleamed. Paintings of peaceful countryside scenes lined the walls, their colors muted with age. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, its pendulum swinging in perfect rhythm, yet Thomas heard no ticking. "I am Helena Vance," the woman said, closing the door behind him. "Your room is prepared. 2nd floor, number 7. Dinner will be served at 8. Thomas set down his trunk, studying her carefully. "I appreciate the hospitality. I should tell you I'm a journalist. I've heard stories about this place." "Stories tend to follow certain places," she replied. "And certain people." She moved to the front desk where a leather-bound registry lay open and extended a fountain pen. "If you would sign in, we keep careful records." Thomas scanned the pages, names, dates, room numbers, but something was wrong. Many entries listed arrivals without departures. "Mrs. Vance," he said slowly, "why are there no checkout dates?" "Some guests prefer to leave quietly," she replied. "We respect their privacy." Thomas signed his name. The ink looked darker than it should have, bleeding slightly into the page. "And the ones who disappear?" he asked. Elena stood very still. "Disappear is such a dramatic word. People come here seeking refuge. Sometimes they find it, sometimes they move on." A door clicked open upstairs, then silence. She said, "Another guest. You'll meet him at dinner." She handed Thomas a brass key, cold against his palm. "Room 7, last door on the left." Before leaving, Thomas hesitated. "One more question. Why the veil?" For a moment, the lamps dimmed, then steadied. "Some answers," Helena said quietly, "are better discovered than told." She turned and glided down a shadowed hallway, her movement so smooth it seemed she barely touched the floor. Thomas climbed the stairs alone. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, gas lamps flickering as shadows danced along the walls. Room 7 waited at the far end. Inside, the room was simple and clean, a bed, a desk, a window overlooking the forest, now nothing but a black void pressed against the glass. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, notebook in hand, unease settling deep in his chest. Whatever secrets Pine Hollow Inn was hiding, he could already feel them watching, and somewhere in the walls, something seemed to listen. Thomas Whitmore woke to silence so complete it felt unnatural. No birdsong, no wind through the trees, not even the distant creak of an old building settling. For a moment he wondered if he'd gone deaf in the night. He reached for his pocket watch on the nightstand. It was ticking, faint but steady. The sound grounded him. Morning light filtered weakly through the window, gray and colorless, as though the sun itself hesitated to touch the forest surrounding Pine Hollow Inn. He dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway. The second-floor corridor looked unchanged, yet something felt subtly wrong. The gas lamps were lit despite the daylight, their flames unnaturally still. The air carried a faint scent of old wood and something else, damp earth perhaps, or something older. Thomas made his way downstairs. The lobby was empty. The grandfather clock stood where it had the night before, pendulum swinging, still utterly silent. It read 8:30, perfectly on time. Breakfast waited in the dining room, a single-place setting, coffee steaming gently, eggs, toast, bacon arranged with careful precision. No sign of Helena Vance. Thomas hesitated, then sat. Hunger won. The food was excellent, almost distractingly so, and he ate more than he intended. Only when he finished did he realize something unsettling. There were no crumbs on the table, no grease on the plate. It looked untouched. He pushed the thought aside, his imagination, and rose to explore the inn. The morning passed quietly. Too quietly. Thomas walked the halls, studied the paintings, lingered near the windows. Outside, the forest remained motionless, trees packed so tightly they seemed less like growth and more like a wall. Near midday, a door opened behind him. "You must be Mr. Whitmore." Thomas turned to find a thin man in his 50s standing in the hallway. His suit was expensive but rumpled, as if slept in for days. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes. When he smiled, it looked rehearsed. "Robert Caldwell," the man said, extending a hand. His grip was weak, cold. "I heard someone new arrived. Thought I should introduce myself." "Thomas Whitmore," he replied. "How long have you been staying here?" Caldwell hesitated. His smile faltered. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "Time has a way of slipping here." They walked together toward the sitting room. Caldwell glanced over his shoulder more than once, as though afraid of being overheard. "I came here to rest," Caldwell continued, "to think, to get away from certain pressures. At first it was perfect, peaceful, but then his voice dropped. You start noticing gaps, little ones. You'll swear you had a conversation that never happened, or you'll look at the clock and realize hours are gone, but you can't remember how." Thomas listened carefully. "Have other guests mentioned this?" "Yes," Caldwell said quickly. "There were others when I arrived. A salesman, a young widow, an older couple celebrating an anniversary. We spoke at meals, shared stories. And now they left," Caldwell said, "in the night. All of them." Thomas frowned. "You didn't hear them go?" "No, that's the strange part. No luggage, no goodbyes. Just empty rooms by morning." A voice echoed through the hall. Mr. Caldwell." Helena Vance stood at the far end of the corridor, veil unmoved, hands folded. "Dinner will be served promptly at 8, she said. "Please don't be late." Caldwell's face drained of color. "Of course," he replied. His tone shifted instantly, calm and obedient. When Helena disappeared, he leaned closer to Thomas and whispered, "Don't look under the veil, whatever you do, and don't trust the silence." Before Thomas could ask more, Caldwell excused himself and retreated to his room. That evening, the dining table was set for 3. Helena sat at the head, her plate untouched. Caldwell picked at his food without appetite. Thomas watched them both, cataloging every detail. "So, Mr. Whitmore," Helena said, "what brings a journalist so far from the city?" "I'm interested in places people avoid," Thomas replied. "Places with stories." Helena inclined her head slightly. "And do you believe this place deserves one?" "I believe something here isn't being said." A pause stretched between them. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, each note lingering too long. "Very well," Helena said at last. "You're free to investigate, ask questions, look around. I have nothing to hide." She stood and left without another word. Caldwell waited until her footsteps faded. "She doesn't lie," he whispered. "Not exactly, but she never tells the whole truth either." Thomas leaned closer. "Have you tried to leave?" Caldwell laughed softly. "Every day, something always stops me. The carriage never arrives, or I forget why I wanted to go, or," his voice faltered, "or I feel this overwhelming dread near the door. Like if I leave, something worse will happen." That night, Thomas lay awake in room 7, listening. At midnight, footsteps began, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway. They stopped outside his door. No knock, no voice. Just the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Then, softly, Helena's voice spoke his name. "Thomas," his heart pounded. "I only want to help you understand," she said. "Understand what?" he called out. "Why some doors should never be opened." The footsteps retreated. By morning, Thomas knew one thing with certainty. No one left Pine Hollow Inn unchanged, and some never left at all. Part 3. The Inn is Watching. 400 words. Thomas stopped trying to convince himself that Pine Hollow Inn was merely strange. By the third morning, that illusion had worn thin, peeled away by a growing list of impossibilities he could no longer ignore. He noticed it first in small ways. His pocket watch and the grandfather clock always agreed, yet hours slipped past without memory. He would sit at his desk to write a single sentence and look up to find the light outside the window had shifted from morning gray to late afternoon gloom. His notes grew disjointed, sentences trailing off mid-thought, as if his mind itself were being edited. The silence pressed in constantly. It was not the peaceful quiet of isolation, but something deliberate, curated. Even the in-zone sounds felt muted. Footsteps swallowed before they could echo, doors closing without a creak. When Helena Vance passed through a room, the air seemed to still around her. Thomas decided to search the inn more thoroughly. The library sat at the end of a narrow hallway on the first floor. Dust clung to the shelves, yet the room was meticulously organized. Most of the books were ordinary novels, agricultural ledgers, local histories, but a filing cabinet in the corner drew his attention. Inside were guest registries dating back over a decade. Thomas carried one to the reading table and began turning pages. The pattern repeated relentlessly. Names entered, rooms assigned, no departures recorded. Over and over again, years of arrivals without endings. A chill crept through him. At the bottom drawer, he found several leather-bound journals without titles. The handwriting inside was elegant, precise, Helena's. The earliest entries spoke of rebuilding after tragedy, a fire, a husband lost, an inn created as a sanctuary. But as the pages turned, the tone darkened. Guests were described not as people, but as conditions. Running from guilt, fleeing debt, escaping grief. Helena cataloged their emotional states with clinical interest, noting how long they stayed, how their demeanor changed, how they grew quieter, and then how they departed. Thomas read until his hands shook. One entry stopped him cold. October 28, 1899. A journalist from Philadelphia has written requesting accommodation. Thomas Whitmore, he seeks truth. They always do. She had known, not suspected, known. A sound overhead made Thomas look up. Footsteps, heavy ones. They crossed the ceiling slowly, not pacing, not wandering, measured, purposeful, too heavy to belong to Helena. The third floor. Thomas closed the journal and left the library. He found Caldwell sitting alone in the parlor, staring at the wall. "Mr. Caldwell," Thomas said, "how long have you truly been here?" The older man blinked. His eyes struggled to focus. "I arrived in winter," he said slowly. "There was snow. I remember that much." Thomas's pulse quickened. "It's October." Caldwell's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "That can't be right. How long ago was the snow?" Caldwell pressed his fingers to his temples, breathing hard. "February," he said. "God help me, it was February. 9 months." Before Thomas could speak again, Helena's voice drifted through the room. "Mr. Whitmore, a word, please." She stood in the doorway, veil unmoving, as though she'd been there all along. The study was small and sparsely furnished. Helena closed the door behind them. "You've been reading," she said. "Yes. And you've drawn conclusions." "I've drawn questions," Thomas replied, "about the guests who never leave, about Mr. Caldwell, about what this place does to people." Helena regarded him silently. "You came here hunting a story," she said at last, "and now you're frightened because you found one. I'm frightened because people are being erased." "No," Helena corrected gently. "They're being consumed." The word settled heavily between them. "What do you mean?" Helena turned toward the window, looking out at the forest. "This land is old, Mr. Whitmore. Older than towns, older than maps. Even the native tribes avoided it. They believed the earth here was hungry." "That's superstition, is it?" She faced him. "You feel it, don't you? The pressure, the way your thoughts slip, the way time dissolves." Thomas said nothing. "I didn't create this," Helena continued. "I discovered it. And once it noticed me, once it understood I could feed it, it made me an offer." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Bring me those already breaking," she said. "Those running from themselves. In return, it will spare you. You let it take them. I chose survival." Thomas backed away. "That makes you a monster." "Yes," Helena said simply. "It does." A scream echoed suddenly through the inn. Thomas spun toward the door. "That," Helena said softly, "was Mr. Caldwell." They ran. Caldwell lay on the floor near the front door, eyes open, expression empty. He was breathing, alive. But whatever spark had animated him was gone. "The inn finished with him," Helena said. "It simply accelerated the process." Shapes pressed against it from the inside, human shapes. Faces frozen in silent screams. Thomas staggered back. "All of them," Helena whispered. "Preserved, aware, forever." "There has to be a way to stop it," Thomas said desperately. "There is," Helena replied. "But it will cost everything." She pointed toward the cellar door. "The source is beneath us." Thomas swallowed. "Then that's where we go." Helena hesitated for the first time. "If we do this," she said, "we won't come back the same." Thomas looked at the walls, at the trapped faces, at Caldwell's empty shell. "None of us already are." Helena opened the cellar door. Darkness spilled out, thick and waiting. Should I write the next part? Part 4. The Truth Beneath the Floor. 1. 600 words. The cellar stairs descended far deeper than any cellar had a right to. Thomas counted the steps, at first 20, then 30, but lost track as the darkness thickened around them, pressing in like a physical weight. Helena walked ahead, lamp held high, its flame struggling against a blackness that seemed to swallow light rather than retreat from it. The air grew colder with every step, damp and metallic, carrying the scent of old earth, and something far older than decay. The walls were not wood or stone. They were packed dirt, carved directly from the ground. Strange symbols were etched into them at regular intervals, geometric patterns that twisted when Thomas tried to focus on them, leaving his eyes aching and his thoughts unsteady. "These markings," he whispered. "What are they?" Helena did not slow. "I don't know. They were here before the inn, before me. I think this place was known long before anyone tried to tame it." The stairs finally opened into a cavern. It was vast, circular, and wrong. Natural stone rose overhead into darkness, but the chamber itself felt shaped, intentional. At its center stood a structure that defied sense, part altar, part growth, part wound in reality. Wood emerged seamlessly from stone. Veins of dark metal pulsed like arteries, and crystalline formations jutted outward, frozen mid-scream. Embedded throughout were objects, hundreds of them. Watches, rings, lockets, spectacles, letters folded and refolded until the creases had worn thin. Each item was a marker, a life reduced to residue. Behind the altar, the cavern wall was not stone at all. It was a vast, translucent membrane, stretching from floor to ceiling, pulsing gently like the surface of a lung. Pressed against it from the other side were faces, countless faces, mouths open in silent agony, eyes wide with unending awareness. Thomas staggered. "My God," he breathed. "God does not come here," Helena said quietly. "If he ever did." The altar pulsed, responding to their presence. The air vibrated with a low, bone-deep hum that made Thomas's teeth ache. "This is what feeds the inn," he said. "The anchor?" "Yes," Helena replied. "The heart, or perhaps the mouth." As Thomas stepped closer, something caught his eye among the embedded possessions. A simple gold wedding band, engraved on the inside. JV, he picked it free. The metal was warm, alive. Helena froze. She whispered, "That belonged to my husband." Thomas turned to her slowly. "Helena, are you certain he died in the fire?" "I saw his body," she said, though doubt crept into her voice. "I buried him." "You buried something," Thomas said gently. "But what if he fled the fire? What if he came here, drawn by this place? What if it took him?" Helena sank to her knees. Among the faces pressed against the membrane, one shifted, older than the others, faded, but unmistakable. "I thought I was running from his death, but I was feeding him to this thing, keeping him here." The cavern trembled as if the inn above sensed betrayal. "We have to destroy it," Thomas said, now. Helena wiped her tears and stood, something hard and resolute settling over her. "Yes, but listen to me carefully. When this begins, the inn will fight back. It will collapse inward. You must run when I tell you. I'm not leaving you." "You are," she said firmly. "Someone has to remember. Someone has to survive." She lifted her veil. Thomas had expected scars. What he saw was far worse. Her face was layered with others, faint impressions of men and women overlapping her own features like guilt-made flesh. Jonathan's eyes stared out through her own, dozens more beneath them. "This is the price of survival," Helena said. "Every soul I fed it left its mark." She picked up a container of kerosene and poured it over the altar. The liquid hissed on contact, steam rising as the structure shuddered violently. The membrane rippled. The trapped faces pressed forward, and for the first time, Thomas heard them, not screams but whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping. It burned inward and outward at once, devouring the altar with unnatural hunger. The cavern screamed, the membrane tore, and something poured out, not smoke, not flame, but pure awareness. Lives flooded Thomas's mind, memories not his own. Love, fear, regret, hope, all released at once. The weight drove him to his knees as the souls finally broke free. Helena stood in the flames, serene. "Go!" she shouted. Thomas ran. The stairs collapsed behind him as he climbed, dirt and stone raining down. The inn above howled, walls screaming as the living structure died. He burst through the cellar door as the floor buckled beneath him and threw himself through the front entrance just as the entire inn imploded, folding inward into the hungry earth. He rolled across wet grass and turned back. Pine Hollow Inn was gone. From the dying flames, figures emerged, translucent, peaceful, Jonathan Vance among them. Helena followed last, her face whole again, smiling softly at Thomas before turning to join the others. Then they faded. The rain came, dawn broke, only ash and a crater remained. Thomas sat in the grass, shaking, knowing one truth with absolute certainty. Some places are not meant to exist. And some stories must be ended, not told. Should I write the next part? Part 5, Ashes, Witnesses, and What Comes After, 900 words. Thomas Whitmore did not remember how long he sat in the wet grass after the inn collapsed. Time, which had already been unreliable inside Pine Hollow, seemed to lose all meaning now that it was gone. Rain fell steadily, extinguishing the last flickers of unnatural flame, washing ash into the earth as if trying to erase what had stood there. When the sun finally rose, it revealed nothing but a shallow crater, scorched soil, and scattered debris. No walls, no foundation, no sign that a three-story inn had ever existed. Thomas rose on shaking legs and walked away. It took hours before he reached a road. Another hour before a farmer's cart passed and carried him to the nearest town. When asked where he had come from, Thomas gave a simple answer. He'd been traveling. His carriage broke down. He got lost in the forest. No one questioned him. Why would they? Back in Philadelphia, the city felt unreal, too loud, too alive. People hurried through streets without knowing how close the world came to swallowing them whole. His mother wept when she saw him, remarking on his hollow eyes the weight he'd lost. Thomas blamed illness, fatigue, long travel. His editor was less kind. "You wasted the paper's money chasing ghost stories," the man snapped. "I expected better, Whitmore." Thomas nodded and accepted the rebuke. There was nothing else he could do. He returned to smaller assignments, safe ones, local politics, business developments, stories that made sense. At night, sleep rarely came. When it did, he dreamed of walls that breathed and faces pressed beneath the surface, watching him not with malice but recognition, gratitude. 3 weeks after his return, Thomas received a letter addressed in careful handwriting, no return address. Inside was a single sentence. "Your husband is free. He loved you until the end." It was signed only with his initials. Thomas never learned whether Martha Caldwell understood. He hoped, at least, that the words brought some measure of peace. In his apartment, Thomas kept a single envelope locked in his desk drawer. Inside were the pages he'd written the night after returning home, everything he could remember about Pine Hollow Inn, Helena Vance, the altar beneath the earth, and the souls trapped between walls. He labeled the envelope with one word: truth. He never opened it again. Then, one evening at the public library, an elderly woman approached him. She spoke carefully, eyes sharp despite her age. "I'm told you're good at finding answers," she said. "Especially the ones people don't want found." She handed him a card. An address, a boarding house in Maryland. Guests who arrived and were never quite the same afterward. Thomas felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The instinct to refuse rose immediately. He wanted a quiet life, a normal one. But normal had burned with Pine Hollow Inn. He thought of Helena's final smile, of the countless faces finally released, of the cost of looking away. "Yes," he said, "I'll look into it." That night, alone in his apartment, Thomas removed the chain from beneath his shirt. Jonathan Vance's wedding ring caught the light, its inscription still clear. "Forever isn't long enough." He slicked it back beneath his collar, not as a talisman, but as a reminder. Some places in the world were wrong. Some evils fed quietly, patiently, waiting for those desperate enough to wander too close. And some truths were too dangerous to publish, but too important to ignore. Thomas Whitmore would never write about Pine Hollow Inn, but he would spend the rest of his life finding places like it and ending them before they could claim another soul. Not for recognition, not for glory, but because someone had to remember, and someone had to fight back. Should I write the next part?